Hello class, today we will be learning about the life cycle of a frog. After viewing this screencast, I hope that all of you know and understand the life cycle of a frog. This picture on the screen is a frog after it is fully developed, in case you were not already aware. When frogs mate, the male frog tends to clasp the female underneath in an embrace called amplexus. He literally climbs on her back, reaches his arms around her waist, either just in front of the hind legs, just behind the front legs, or even around the head. Amplexus can last several days. Do you know where amplexus occurs? It usually occurs in the water. Sometimes amplexus occurs on land, and sometimes it even occurs in trees. While in the amplexus position, the male frog fertilizes the eggs as they are laid. Frogs tend to lay eggs, single eggs, in masses, where blank usually lay eggs in long chains. Can you guess what animal fits in the blank? A toad. Some frogs leave at this point, but others stick around to watch over their little ones. The next step in the life cycle is the egg. Frogs and toads tend to lay many eggs because there are many hazards between fertilization and being a full-grown frog. The eggs that die turn white, which is shown over to the right. Frogs lay their eggs in water or wet places. A floating clump of egg is called a frog spawn. The egg begins as a single cell. Several thousand are sometimes laid at once. It becomes surrounded by a jelly-like covering which protects the egg. The egg slowly develops, but only a few develop into adults. This is because some animals eat the eggs. Can you guess what some of these animals that eat the eggs are? One of these animals that eats the frog eggs is a duck. Another is a fish. And additionally, insects eat frog eggs. Other wet water creatures also eat the eggs. Next, the cell splits. The single cell in the egg eventually splits into two. These two split, making 4 cells, and so on and so on and so on. Eventually, there are many cells in the egg. This diagram shows that exact duplication that I just mentioned. As you can see here, there are 2, and that becomes 4, and it continues to get split into more and more eggs. So, the embryo is next. The massive cells in the egg become an embryo. Organs and gills begin to form, and in the meantime, the embryo lives off of its internal yolk. This supplies it with nutrients for 21 days. If you didn't know what an embryo was, it's an unborn or unhatched offspring in the process of development. Do you know what step in the life cycle is next? The tadpole. After its 21-day development period, the embryo leaves its jelly shell and attaches itself to a weed in the water. This quickly becomes a tadpole, a baby frog. The tadpole grows until they are big enough to break free into the water. This can take from 3 days to 3 weeks, depending on what kind of frog they will become. They eat very small plants called algae, and the tadpole has a long tail and lives in the water. It is extremely vulnerable and must rely on its camouflage to protect itself. Can you guess what order these pictures go in? If this was the order that you guessed, then you're correct. After about 5 weeks, the tadpole begins to change. It starts to grow hind legs, which are soon followed with forelegs. Lungs begin to develop, preparing the frog for its life on land. The tail becomes longer and makes it possible for the tadpole to swim around and catch food. They eat plants and decaying animal matter. Some tadpoles eat frogs, frog eggs, and other tadpoles. So as you can see here, this is the tadpole beginning to change and starting to grow its legs. The final stage is the frog. 11 weeks after the egg was laid, a fully developed frog with lungs and legs and no tail emerged from the water. The frog will live mostly on land with occasional swims. The tiny frog begins to eat insects and worms. Eventually, it will find a mate, and the whole process will begin again. This is the whole entire life cycle of a frog. Please look carefully at this diagram and go over it with yourself. We will speak more in class about this, and I will answer any questions that any of you have. Eventually, we will have a quiz on this life cycle, and you will need to label the diagram from start to finish. Thank you. I hope this instructional video was helpful.